The sound of glass shattering against the saloon floor was what made Sarah Whitmore look up from her ledger, her pen freezing mid-stroke as she heard the cruel laughter that followed, and in that moment, she knew her carefully constructed life in Silver Ridge, Montana territory was about to change forever. It was late September in 1878, and the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of the general store her late father had left her 6 months prior. Sarah had been managing the accounts, trying to keep the business afloat despite the whispers that a woman had no business running such an establishment. At 22 years old, she had proven herself capable, but certain men in town refused to see past her gender. One of those men was currently making a scene next door. Sarah set down her pen and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The saloon across the street was where most of the trouble started, but the ruckus was coming from Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. A group of men had gathered outside, and Sarah recognized the hulking form of Dutch Carmichael, a cattle boss who had been making unwanted advances toward her for weeks. He was drunk again, shouting something she could not quite make out. She was about to return to her work when she heard her name carried on the wind. Her blood ran cold. Dutch was telling some story, his voice booming across the street, and the words he used made her face flush with anger and humiliation. He was spinning lies about her, crude fabrications about supposed encounters that had never happened, painting her as a woman of loose morals to anyone who would listen. And Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She had rejected Dutch's advances firmly but politely 3 times now. Apparently, his pride could not withstand the rejection, and this was his revenge. Several men laughed at his vulgar tale, though she noticed some looked uncomfortable and walked away. But the damage was being done. In a small town like Silver Ridge, reputation was everything. Without it, she would lose customers, lose respect, and eventually lose her store. She grabbed her shawl and headed for the door, fury overriding caution. She would not let this man destroy everything she had worked for with his lies. But as she stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, another figure emerged from the opposite direction. He was the largest man Sarah had ever seen, at easily 6.5 feet tall with shoulders so broad he had to turn slightly to fit through doorways. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin pants and a simple cotton shirt that strained against the muscles of his chest and arms. Everything about him spoke of strength and wilderness, of a man more comfortable in the mountains than in civilization. Sarah had seen him once before, 3 weeks ago, when he had come to her store to purchase supplies. He had been polite but quiet, paying in cash and loading his own goods. She remembered his eyes, a striking gray blue that seemed to see more than most people. Someone had told her later that he was called Nathaniel Cross, a trapper and hunter who lived somewhere up in the mountains and only came to town when necessary. Now, those gray-blue eyes were fixed on Dutch Carmichael with an intensity that made Sarah stop in her tracks. Nathaniel walked with the easy confidence of a predator, crossing the dusty street in long strides. Dutch was still holding court, embellishing his false tale with new crude details when the mountain man's shadow fell across him. "You want to repeat that?" Nathaniel's voice was deep and quiet, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. Dutch turned, his alcohol-flushed face splitting into a sneer. "Well, if it ain't the wild man himself. This ain't your concern, Cross. Go back to your cave." "The lady's name just became my concern," Nathaniel said. His tone had not changed, still quiet, still calm, but there was something underneath it that made several men step back. "You're going to apologize to Miss Whitmore, and you are going to tell everyone here that you lied." Dutch's face darkened. He was a big man himself, thick with muscle from years of ranch work, and he had a reputation as a brawler. "Like hell I will. What I said is the truth, and if you are sniffing around her skirts, you should know what kind of woman she is." Sarah saw Nathaniel's jaw tighten, the only outward sign of his anger. "Last chance," he said. Dutch laughed and took a swing at him. What happened next was something Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. Nathaniel moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size, ducking under Dutch's punch and driving his fist into the cattle boss's midsection. The air rushed out of Dutch in a whoosh, and he staggered backward. But he was tough. Sarah had to give him that. He recovered and charged at Nathaniel like an enraged bull. The two men collided with an impact that Sarah felt through the boardwalk beneath her feet. They grappled, a tangle of fists and fury, crashing against the wall of the boarding house. Dutch managed to land a solid punch to Nathaniel's jaw, snapping the mountain man's head to the side. Blood appeared at the corner of Nathaniel's mouth, but he did not slow. He grabbed Dutch by the shirt and threw him into the street. Dust rose in clouds as Dutch hit the ground and rolled. He came up swinging, and the fight continued in earnest. Nathaniel's fists were like hammers, each blow landing with brutal precision. Dutch fought dirty, trying to gouge eyes and kick knees, but Nathaniel seemed to anticipate every move. The mountain man's knuckles split open, blood flowing freely, but he did not stop. The crowd had grown, people emerging from shops and houses to watch. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding. She should stop this, should call for the sheriff, but she found she could not move. No one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever stood up for her honor against a man like Dutch Carmichael. Dutch tried one last desperate rush, lowering his shoulder to tackle Nathaniel to the ground. The mountain man set his feet and caught Dutch mid-charge, his massive arms wrapping around the cattle boss in a crushing bear hug. Dutch's face went purple as Nathaniel squeezed, lifting him clear off the ground. There was a sound like creaking leather, and Dutch made a strangled noise. "Apologize," Nathaniel growled, his voice rough with exertion. Dutch gasped, his arms flailing uselessly. "I apologize," he wheezed. "Say you lied." I lied about Miss Whitmore. Put me down." Nathaniel held him for another moment, making sure everyone heard, then dropped him. Dutch collapsed in a heap, gasping for air. The mountain man stood over him, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his knuckles onto the dirt. "If I hear her name in your mouth again," Nathaniel said quietly, "I will break more than your ribs, understand?" Dutch nodded weakly, too winded to speak. Nathaniel turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. "Anyone else have something to say about Miss Whitmore?" His tone was mild, almost conversational, but no one met his eyes. Heads shook, and people began to disperse, suddenly remembering pressing business elsewhere. Sarah found her voice at last. "Mr. Cross," she called out, stepping off the boardwalk. Her legs felt unsteady, adrenaline and shock making her movements uncertain. Nathaniel turned to her, and his expression softened immediately. The dangerous edge vanished, replaced by something almost gentle. "Miss Whitmore," he said, nodding respectfully, "I apologize for the violence. I know ladies do not care for such things." Sarah's voice caught. She looked down at his hands, at the blood dripping steadily from his torn knuckles. "You are hurt. Please come with me. Let me tend to those wounds." "It is nothing," he said, but she was already reaching for his arm. "It is not nothing," she said firmly. "You fought for my honor, Mr. Cross. The least I can do is bandage your hands. Please." He looked at her for a long moment, those gray-blue eyes searching her face. Then he nodded. "If you insist, ma'am." Sarah led him across the street to the store, acutely aware of the eyes still watching them. Let them watch, she thought with uncharacteristic defiance. Let them see. She unlocked the door and ushered him inside, closing it firmly behind them. The store was dim and cool after the bright heat of the street. Sarah guided Nathaniel to the back room, where she kept a small table and chairs for taking meals. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to one of the chairs. "I have medical supplies upstairs. I will be right back." She hurried up the narrow stairs to her living quarters above the store, her mind racing. Her hands were shaking as she gathered clean cloth, a basin, and the precious bottle of carbolic acid her father had purchased from a traveling doctor. When she returned to the back room, Nathaniel was sitting as she had left him, his large frame making the simple chair look like a child's furniture. Sarah set the basin on the table and poured water from the pitcher she kept on the sideboard. She soaked a cloth and reached for his right hand. Up close, she could see the full extent of the damage. His knuckles were split open in several places, already swelling, and there were cuts across the backs of his hands where they had connected with Dutch's teeth. "This will sting," she warned, dabbing gently at the wounds. Nathaniel did not flinch, though the carbolic acid must have burned fiercely. Sarah worked carefully, cleaning each cut, her fingers small and pale against his much larger, calloused hands. She had never been this close to him before, had never noticed the small details. There was a scar on his left wrist, old and faded. His forearms were roped with muscle, corded from years of hard labor. He smelled of pine and leather and wood smoke, a scent that was entirely different from the other men in town who reeked of sweat and whiskey. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly, not looking up from her work. "You barely know me." "I know you enough," Nathaniel replied. His voice was quieter now, gentler. "You have always been fair and honest in your dealings. You did not deserve what he was saying." Sarah's throat tightened. Most men would not have cared. "Then most men are fools." She finished cleaning his right hand and began wrapping it with strips of clean cloth, creating a neat bandage. Then she reached for his left hand, repeating the process. The silence between them was comfortable, but broken only by the distant sounds of the town outside. "I saw you once," Nathaniel said suddenly. "About a year ago. I was bringing in furs, and you were helping an old Crow woman who had come to trade. The other shopkeepers had turned her away, but you welcomed her. You treated her with respect, gave her fair prices." I remembered that. Sarah looked up, surprised. She did remember the incident. The elderly woman had beautiful beadwork to sell, and Sarah had been happy to trade for it. "You saw that?" "I see a lot of things," Nathaniel said. "I may live in the mountains, but I pay attention when I come to town. I pay attention to who treats people right and who does not." Sarah finished bandaging his left hand and set it down gently on the table, but she did not let go. Instead, she lifted his hand and, bowing before she could think better of it, pressed a gentle kiss to the bandaged knuckles. Nathaniel went very still. Sarah moved to his other hand, her heart pounding, and kissed those knuckles too. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one has ever done anything like that for me." When she finally looked up, Nathaniel was staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. There was wonder in his eyes, and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "Sarah," he said, using her given name for the first time. His voice was rough with emotion. "Yes?" she breathed. "I would fight 100 men for you," he said simply, "and count it an honor." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a wall she had not even known was there beginning to crumble. She'd been alone for so long, had worked so hard to prove herself capable and independent, but standing here with this mountain of a man who had defended her without thought for his own safety, she realized how much she had been craving someone to stand beside her. "Stay for supper," she said impulsively. "Please, it is the least I can do." Nathaniel hesitated. "I should not impose." "You are not imposing. I am inviting you. Unless you have pressing business elsewhere?" Or a slow smile spread across his bearded face, transforming it completely. "No pressing business," he admitted. Sarah found herself smiling back. "Good. Then it is settled." She busied herself preparing a meal, grateful for something to do with her hands. Her small kitchen was well stocked, and she put together a simple but hearty supper of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread. Nathaniel watched her work, his bandaged hands resting on the table. "You live up in the mountains year-round?" Sarah asked as she set plates on the table. "Mostly," Nathaniel confirmed. "I have a cabin about 2 days' ride north of here, up where the territory is still wild. I trap in the winter, hunt and prospect a bit in the summer, come to town every few weeks for supplies." "That sounds lonely," Sarah said before she could stop herself. Nathaniel considered this. "It is quiet," he said, "but I have never minded quiet. I grew up in these mountains. My father was a trapper too. He taught me the land, taught me how to survive. After he died, I just kept to the life we had built together." "I'm sorry about your father," Sarah said softly. "It was a long time ago. I was 17. He paused. "What about you? How did you come to be running a store?" Sarah sat down across from him and passed him the plate of cornbread. "My father and I came west from Ohio when I was 10. My mother had died of fever, and he wanted a fresh start. We settled here, and he opened the store. It did well enough. He taught me the business, taught me how to keep books and deal with suppliers. When he died last spring, I inherited it all." "That must have been hard," Nathaniel said, "losing him and taking on so much responsibility." "It was," Sarah admitted, "but I'm glad he taught me. Otherwise, I would have been at the mercy of men like Dutch Carmichael, trying to buy my store for a fraction of what it is worth." She met Nathaniel's eyes. "Or worse." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. There was something about Nathaniel's quiet presence that made her feel safe. He did not try to fill every silence with empty chatter, did not make her feel like she had to perform or impress. He simply was, solid and dependable as the mountains he called home. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Nathaniel said, finishing his second helping of beans. "I can cook game well enough over a fire, but this," he gestured at the table. "This is real cooking," Sarah laughed. "It's nothing fancy." "It is to me." As the light faded outside, Sarah lit the lamps and they continued talking. Nathaniel told her about life in the mountains, about tracking elk through deep snow and watching the sunrise from high peaks. He spoke of the changing seasons, of the way the aspens turned gold in autumn and the rivers ran silver with salmon in the spring. His words painted pictures so vivid that Sarah could almost see it all. In turn, she told him about running the store, about the satisfaction of keeping her father's legacy alive. She confessed her fears about the future, about whether she could hold on to the business in a world that did not believe women should own property or make their own decisions. "You will hold on to it," Nathaniel said with absolute certainty. "You are stronger than you think, Sarah Whitmore." The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have seen strong people and weak people, and I know the difference. Strength is not about size or muscle. It is about will. And you have more will than anyone I have met." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathaniel reached across the table, his bandaged hand covering hers. "I mean it," he said quietly. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, something unspoken passing between them. Sarah felt it, a connection forming, delicate as spider silk, but growing stronger with each passing second. Finally, reluctantly, Nathaniel withdrew his hand. "I should go," he said. "You have a reputation to protect, and I have already caused enough talk for one day." "I do not care about talk," Sarah said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "Maybe not," Nathaniel said gently, "but I care about you, and I will not be the reason people whisper." He stood, or his head nearly brushing the low ceiling. "But I would like to call on you properly if you would allow it. Tomorrow, maybe? We could take a walk with a chaperone if you prefer." Sarah's heart leapt. "I would like that," she said. "Very much. And I do not need a chaperone. I'm 22 years old and the owner of this establishment. I will walk with whom I please." Nathaniel's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Tomorrow, then, in the afternoon." "Tomorrow afternoon," Sarah confirmed. She walked him to the door, and he paused on the threshold. "Thank you for tending my hands," he said, "and for the meal, and for—" he hesitated. "For everything." "Thank you for defending me," Sarah replied. "I will never forget it." After he left, Sarah locked the door and leaned against it, her mind whirling. And she looked down at her own hands, remembering the feel of his skin beneath her fingers, the way his knuckles had felt under her lips. What was happening to her? She barely knew this man, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. She prepared for bed in a daze, her thoughts full of gray-blue eyes and a deep, gentle voice. As she lay in the darkness, she could still smell pine and wood smoke, as if the scent had somehow embedded itself in her consciousness. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she would see him again. The next day seemed to drag on forever. Sarah went through her usual routines, opening the store, helping customers, taking inventory. But her mind was elsewhere, counting down the hours until afternoon. She caught herself checking her reflection in the small mirror behind the counter more than once, tucking stray strands of honey blonde hair back into place, pinching her cheeks for color. Mrs. Henderson came by mid-morning, ostensibly to purchase thread, but really to gossip about yesterday's events. "That mountain man certainly made an impression," she said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Dutch Carmichael has not shown his face today. Word is he is still sore from the beating." "Mr. Cross was defending my honor," Sarah said firmly. "I am grateful to him." "Oh, we all know Dutch was spreading lies," Mrs. Henderson said quickly. "No one who knows you believed a word of it, but still it was quite dramatic. And now people are saying you invited Mr. Cross into your store for quite some time afterward." She raised her eyebrows meaningfully. Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I bandaged his hands. He was injured defending me. It was the decent thing to do." Of course, Mrs. Henderson said, but her tone suggested she did not believe that was all that had happened. She paid for her thread and left, and Sarah knew the gossip would be all over town by noon. Let them talk, she thought defiantly. She was tired of living her life according to other people's opinions. When the afternoon finally arrived, Sarah closed the store and went upstairs to change. She put on her best day dress, a simple but well-made creation in deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up carefully, was allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. She was just descending the stairs when she heard the knock at the door. Her heart jumped into her throat. She took a moment to compose herself, then opened the door. Nathaniel stood on the boardwalk, and her breath caught. He had cleaned up, his hair freshly washed and braided back, his beard trimmed. He wore a clean shirt and had clearly made an effort to look presentable. But it was the bouquet in his hand that made Sarah's eyes widen. He had brought her wildflowers, a riot of late summer blooms in purple and gold and white. "For you," he said, offering them with an almost shy expression that seemed incongruous on such a large, powerful man. "They are beautiful," Sarah said, taking them carefully. "Where did you find these?" "There is a meadow about an hour's ride from here, and I went early this morning." He paused. "I wanted to bring you something." Sarah pressed her face to the flowers, breathing in their sweet scent. No one had ever brought her flowers before. "Thank you," she said softly. "Let me put these in water, and then we can walk." She arranged the flowers in a jar and set them on the counter where she could see them. Then she took Nathaniel's offered arm, and they stepped out into the bright afternoon. Silver Ridge was a small town, barely 3 streets wide, nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered mountains. Sarah and Nathaniel walked slowly along the main street, then turned onto a side path that led toward the creek that ran along the town's eastern edge. People watched them, some openly, some from behind curtains, but Sarah held her head high and ignored them all. "Does the attention bother you?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "No," Sarah said. "Not anymore. I've spent 6 months trying to prove myself to these people, trying to make them see me as capable and respectable. But yesterday, when Dutch was saying those things, I realized something. No matter what I do, some people will always find a reason to judge me, so I might as well live my life the way I choose." "That's a good philosophy," Nathaniel said. They reached the creek and Sarah led him to her favorite spot, a grassy bank shaded by cottonwood trees. The water gurgled pleasantly over smooth stones, and the air was cooler here, away from the dusty street. They sat down on the grass, Sarah arranging her skirts carefully. For a moment, neither spoke, content to listen to the creek and watch the play of light through the leaves. "Tell me more about your cabin," Sarah said eventually. "What is it like?" Nathaniel leaned back on his hands, gazing at the distant mountains. "It is simple," he said. "One room with a stone fireplace and a good roof. But the location," his voice softened. "It sits in a valley between 2 peaks, near a spring-fed lake. In the morning, the mist rises off the water, and sometimes I see elk coming down to drink. In winter, the snow gets deep, but the cabin stays warm. And in summer," he turned to look at her. "In summer, everything is green and alive, and you can hear the wind in the pines like music." Sarah closed her eyes, imagining it. "It sounds like paradise." "It can be lonely," Nathaniel admitted. "I told you I do not mind quiet, and that is true. But lately, I've been thinking it would be nice to have someone to share it with." He paused. "Someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to watch the sunrise with." Sarah's pulse quickened. Was he talking about her, or just speaking generally? She was afraid to ask, afraid to assume. "You could find someone," she said carefully. "A man like you, kind, strong, honorable. Any woman would be fortunate to have you." "I'm not interested in any woman," Nathaniel said quietly. "I'm interested in one woman, one very particular woman who runs a general store and has eyes like a summer sky and more courage than any person I have ever met." Sarah's breath caught. She turned to look at him and found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Nathaniel," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me say this," he said. I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But from the moment I saw you treat that Crow woman with kindness, I have not been able to get you out of my mind. And yesterday, when I heard Dutch saying those things, I did not even think. I just knew I had to stop him. I had to protect you." "You did protect me," Sarah whispered. "I want to keep protecting you," Nathaniel said. "Not because I think you need it. You are stronger than you know. But because I want to stand beside you. I want to be the one you turn to when things are hard. I want to be the one who makes you smile at the end of a long day." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I know I am not much. I live in the wilderness and I do not have fine manners or education, but I can offer you honesty and loyalty and," his voice roughened, "and love, as if you will have it." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks before she could stop them. "You think you are not much?" she said, her voice shaking. "Nathaniel, you're the finest man I have ever met. You are gentle and kind and brave. You see people for who they really are, not just what they can do for you. And yesterday," she squeezed his hand, "yesterday you were willing to fight for me when no one else would. How could I not fall in love with someone like that?" Nathaniel's eyes widened. "You love me." "I am falling in love with you," Sarah corrected softly. "It is fast, maybe too fast. But I feel it happening. Every time I look at you, every time you speak, I feel it growing stronger." Nathaniel moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. His palm was warm despite the bandages, and Sarah leaned into the touch. "Sarah Whitmore," he said softly. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. "Please." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Sarah did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, with a fierceness that surprised her. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle at first, almost reverent. But then Sarah pressed closer, her hands coming up to rest on his broad chest, and the kiss deepened. It was like nothing Sarah had ever experienced. Her one previous kiss, from a boy back in Ohio when she was 16, had been awkward and unpleasant. This was different. This was fire and tenderness combined, a perfect balance of passion and care. Nathaniel kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be cherished, and Sarah felt herself melting into him. When they finally broke apart, while both were breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face. "I have wanted to do that since yesterday," he admitted. Sarah laughed breathlessly. "So have I." They sat by the creek for hours, talking and occasionally stealing more kisses. Nathaniel told her about his childhood, about growing up with his father in the mountains. His mother had died when he was young, and it had been just the two of them for years, living off the land, trading furs for supplies. When his father died in a winter hunting accident, Nathaniel had been devastated but had continued the life they had built together. "I think he would have liked you," Nathaniel said. "He always said the measure of a person was in how they treated others when they had nothing to gain from it. You have that quality." Sarah told him about her own childhood, about her mother's gentle nature, and her father's determination to build a better life in the West. She spoke of the hard early years in Silver Ridge, when the store was struggling and money was tight, and how proud she'd been when her father finally turned a profit. "He believed in me," she said, "even when no one else did. He taught me everything about running a business, and he never once suggested I should just find a husband and let him take over. He wanted me to be independent, to be able to stand on my own." "He sounds like a wise man," Nathaniel said. "He was. I miss him every day." The sun was setting by the time they reluctantly made their way back to town. Nathaniel walked her to the door of the store, and they stood on the boardwalk, or neither wanting to say goodbye. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" Nathaniel asked. "You can see me whenever you like," Sarah said. "I'm not going anywhere." "I need to head back to my cabin for a few days," Nathaniel said regretfully. "I have traps to check and supplies to bring in before winter, but I will be back by the end of the week. Will you wait for me?" "I will wait," Sarah promised. Nathaniel kissed her once more, a long, sweet kiss that left her dizzy. Then he pulled back, his hands lingering on her waist. "Until the end of the week, then." "Until then." Sarah watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the gathering dusk. She pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. Then she went inside, locked the door, and leaned against it with a sigh. She was falling in love with a mountain man. It was impractical, maybe even foolish. but it felt more right than anything she had ever done. The next few days passed in a strange haze. Sarah went about her business, but her mind was always elsewhere, counting down the hours until Nathaniel's return. She found herself looking at the wildflowers he had brought her, now arranged prominently on the counter, and smiling for no reason. The town was still buzzing with gossip about the fight and about Sarah's walk with Nathaniel. Mrs. Henderson was not the only one with questions. Several women came by the store, ostensibly to shop but really to probe for information. "Is it true you are courting the mountain man?" asked Agnes Miller, the blacksmith's wife. "We are getting to know each other," Sarah said diplomatically. He is very different from most men around here," Agnes said. "Are you sure you know what you are doing?" Sarah met her eyes steadily. "I am very sure." Not everyone was skeptical. Young Emma Curtis, only 18 and newly married, came by with stars in her eyes. "I think it is so romantic," she gushed, "like something from a dime novel. The rugged mountain man defending your honor and sweeping you off your feet." Sarah laughed. "It is not quite that dramatic." "But he did fight for you," Emma insisted, "and he did bring you flowers. That is romantic." Perhaps it was, Sarah thought. Perhaps she was living in a story after all. On the 4th day of Nathaniel's absence, Dutch Carmichael finally showed his face in town. Sarah saw him through the store window, moving stiffly, his face still bruised from the fight. And he did not come near her store, but she felt a chill nonetheless. Men like Dutch did not forget humiliation easily. That evening, as she was closing up, Sheriff Tom Bradley stopped by. He was a fair man in his 50s, one of the few people in town who had treated Sarah with consistent respect. "Miss Whitmore," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I wanted to check on you. Make sure you are doing all right after the incident earlier this week." "I am fine, Sheriff," Sarah said. "Thanks to Mr. Cross." "About that," the sheriff said carefully. "I am glad he stood up for you, and Lord knows Dutch had it coming. But I want you to be careful. Dutch has been making noise about getting revenge. Nothing specific, just ugly talk. I have warned him off, but—" he shrugged. "Keep your doors locked at night, and if you see him coming around, then you let me know immediately." Sarah felt a flicker of fear but pushed it down. "I will. Thank you for the warning." After the sheriff left, Sarah locked up carefully and went upstairs. She tried to eat supper but found she had little appetite. The sheriff's warning had unsettled her. She trusted that Nathaniel had scared Dutch. But what if it was not enough? What if Dutch tried something while Nathaniel was away? She forced herself to calm down. Dutch was a bully, but he was not stupid. He would not risk another confrontation with Nathaniel, and he certainly would not do anything that would land him in jail. She was safe. Still, she slept poorly that night, waking at every small sound. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah opened the store and tried to focus on her work. She had a shipment of dry goods coming in soon and needed to make room on the shelves. She was rearranging stock when the door opened and her heart leapt. But it was not Nathaniel. It was a group of miners, rough men from the camps in the hills, looking to purchase picks and other supplies. Sarah helped them efficiently, and they paid and left without incident. More customers followed throughout the morning. Business was actually quite good, and Sarah realized that the gossip about her and Nathaniel might actually be helping rather than hurting. People were curious, and curiosity brought them into the store. It was early afternoon when the door opened again, and this time it was him. Nathaniel filled the doorway, his saddlebags over one shoulder, and Sarah's face split into a grin she could not contain. "You are early," she said. "We're hurrying around the counter." "I hurried," Nathaniel admitted. "I did not want to wait another day to see you." There were other customers in the store, and Sarah was acutely aware of their eyes on her, but she did not care. She walked right up to Nathaniel and took his hands, bandages now removed but knuckles still healing. "I missed you," she said softly. "I missed you too," he replied. His eyes searched her face. "Are you all right? You look tired." "I did not sleep well," Sarah admitted. "The sheriff came by and warned me that Dutch has been talking about revenge. It unsettled me." Nathaniel's expression darkened. "Where is he now?" "I do not know. I have not seen him today. And honestly, I'm not that worried. He is all talk." "Maybe," Nathaniel said, but I'm going to stay in town for a few days, just to make sure. And I can camp outside of town if you think it would be more proper. Stay at Mrs. Henderson's, Sarah said firmly. She has rooms to let, and it is right next door. I would feel better knowing you were close. Nathaniel nodded. All right, I will get a room, and then maybe we can have supper together, unless you are too tired. I am never too tired for you, Sarah said, and meant it. Nathaniel smiled, that transformative expression that lit up his whole face, and Sarah felt her heart swell. How had she gotten so lucky? How had this man, this wonderful, kind, strong man, walked into her life? Nathaniel got a room at the boarding house, and that evening they had supper together again in Sarah's quarters. It was becoming a comfortable routine, cooking and eating and talking. Sarah found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, on dreams and fears and hopes for the future. Nathaniel listened with his whole attention, never dismissing or minimizing her feelings. What do you want from life? He asked her as they sat together after the meal, drinking coffee. Sarah considered the question. I want to keep my store, she said. I want to honor my father's legacy and prove that a woman can succeed in business, but I also want, she hesitated, I want a family. I want children someday and a partner who respects me. I want love, she looked at him. What about you? I used to think I wanted to live alone in the mountains forever, Nathaniel said slowly. But that was before I met you. Now I want something different. I want a home, not just a cabin. I want someone to share my life with. I want to wake up next to the woman I love and know that I am building something that matters. And what about your trapping? Sarah asked. Would you give that up? I do not know, Nathaniel admitted. It is how I make my living. But maybe I could find a different way. Maybe I could do shorter trips or find work closer to town. He reached across the table and took her hand. I would do whatever it takes to be with you, Sarah, if you want me. I want you, Sarah said without hesitation. But I do not want you to give up your life for me. There has to be a way to make both things work. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming. Maybe Nathaniel could continue trapping but come to town more often. Maybe Sarah could hire help for the store, giving her more freedom. And they could build a life together that honored both their needs. I'm getting ahead of myself, Nathaniel said eventually. We have only known each other a week. I should not be talking about the future like this. Why not? Sarah asked. I feel it too, Nathaniel. I know it is fast, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you. I love you too, Nathaniel said, and the words settled over them like a benediction. Over the next few days, they were inseparable. Nathaniel helped Sarah in the store, carrying heavy crates and stocking high shelves. Customers got used to seeing the mountain man behind the counter, and to Sarah's surprise, many seemed to approve of the match. Even Mrs. Henderson, normally a stickler for propriety, made approving comments about what a fine couple they made. Not everyone was pleased, though. Dutch Carmichael's friends gave them hostile looks when they passed on the street. And one evening, as Sarah was locking up the store, she found a note slipped under the door. The words were scrawled in an angry hand. You will regret choosing that savage over a real man. Sarah showed it to Nathaniel, and his jaw tightened. I am going to find him and end this. No, Sarah said firmly. That's what he wants. He wants to provoke you into doing something that will get you arrested or worse. We are not going to give him that satisfaction. Sarah, I mean it, Nathaniel. We will tell the sheriff and let him handle it. Dutch is just a coward trying to scare me. He will not actually do anything. Nathaniel was not happy about it, but he agreed. They took the note to Sheriff Bradley, who promised to have a word with Dutch. But the incident left them both on edge. That night, Nathaniel walked Sarah to her door and hesitated. I do not like leaving you alone, he said. What if Dutch tries something? I will lock the doors, Sarah assured him, and I have my father's rifle upstairs. I know how to use it. I know you do, Nathaniel said, but that does not make me worry less. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. I will be fine, she murmured against his chest. Go get some rest. We can meet for breakfast tomorrow. Reluctantly, Nathaniel let her go. He waited until she was inside with the door locked before heading to the boarding house. Sarah watched him go from the window, then turned to prepare for bed. She had just changed into her nightgown when she heard the sound. It was subtle, just a faint creak from downstairs, but it was enough to make her freeze. The store was locked. She had checked it herself. So what? Another sound, definitely a footstep. Someone was in the store. Sarah's heart began to pound. She grabbed the rifle from where it hung on the wall and crept to the top of the stairs. The store below was dark, but she could see a shadow moving, hear the sound of things being shifted. "I have a rifle," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt, "and I will use it. Get out of my store." The shadow stopped moving. Then a familiar, mocking voice called back, "Come on down here, Miss Whitmore. You and I need to have a talk." Dutch Carmichael. Sarah's blood ran cold. How had he gotten in? She was certain she had locked everything. But this was not the time to wonder. She needed to get help. "Get out," she said again. "Now, or I'm going to start shooting." "You would not shoot me," Dutch said. He sounded drunk, his words slightly slurred. "You are too much of a lady for that, but me, I am not so nice. You have made a fool of me, Miss Whitmore, you and that mountain freak of yours. I think it is time someone taught you a lesson." Sarah heard him start up the stairs, and panic surged through her. She backed away from the stairwell, raising the rifle. "I am warning you." But then another voice cut through the darkness, cold and deadly. "Touch her and die." Dutch froze. Sarah peered down and saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway of the store, having somehow entered silently. He looked absolutely lethal in the dim light, his whole body coiled with controlled fury. "How did you—" Dutch began. "I never left," Nathaniel said flatly. "I was watching from outside, and I saw you break in through the back window. Now you have two choices. You can leave right now and never come near Sarah again, or I can drag you out into the street and beat you until you cannot walk. Your choice." Dutch hesitated, calculating. He was drunk, but not so drunk that he could not remember what Nathaniel had done to him before. "This is not over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Nathaniel replied, "because if I see you anywhere near this store or Sarah again, I will not just beat you. I will kill you. And that is not a threat. It is a promise." The deadly certainty in his voice must have penetrated even Dutch's alcohol-fueled bravado. He turned and stumbled down the stairs. It's pushing past Nathaniel and out into the night. Nathaniel waited until he was gone, then came up the stairs. Sarah was shaking, the rifle still clutched in her hands. Gently, Nathaniel took the weapon and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "You are safe," he murmured. "I have got you. You are safe." Sarah clung to him, her body trembling with reaction. "You said you left." "I did not trust him," Nathaniel said simply. "So I stayed across the street watching. When I saw him sneaking around the back of the building, I followed." His arms tightened around her. "I'm so sorry I did not stop him before he got inside. I was trying to catch him in the act so the sheriff could arrest him." "It is all right," Sarah said. "You came. That is what matters." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other. Finally, Sarah pulled back enough to look up at him. "Stay," she said. "Please. I do not want to be alone tonight." Nathaniel hesitated. "Sarah, if anyone finds out I spent the night here, your reputation—" "I do not care about my reputation," Sarah interrupted. "I care about you, and I'm asking you to stay. You can sleep down here on the settee if it makes you feel better. I just need to know you are close." Nathaniel searched her face, then nodded. "All right, I will stay." Sarah made up the small settee in her sitting room with blankets and a pillow, though it was far too short for Nathaniel's large frame. He did not complain, just settled in as best he could. Sarah retreated to her bedroom, but she left the door open, needing to be able to see him. "Nathaniel?" she called softly into the darkness. "Yes? Thank you. For everything." "Always," came his reply. Sarah finally fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, feeling safer than she had in days. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee. Confused, she got up and found Nathaniel in her small kitchen, somehow having figured out how to use her stove. "You made coffee," she said, touched. "I figured you would need it after last night," he said, handing her a cup. "I hope I did it right. I'm more used to campfire brewing." Sarah took a sip and smiled. It was strong enough to strip paint, but it was warm and caffeinated, and that was all that mattered. "It is perfect." After they had breakfast, they went to the sheriff. Nathaniel explained what had happened, and Sheriff Bradley's face grew grim. "That is breaking and entering, plus attempted assault," he said. "I will get a warrant and bring Dutch in. He's going to spend some time in jail for this." "Good," Sarah said. Dutch Carmichael was arrested that afternoon and charged with multiple crimes. The trial was swift, and he was sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison. As he was led away in chains, he shot one last hate-filled look at Sarah and Nathaniel, but the mountain man simply stared back, his expression implacable. Dutch was the first to look away. With Dutch gone, a weight lifted from Sarah's shoulders. She could finally breathe easy, could finally focus on the future she wanted to build. That future, she knew, included Nathaniel. They spent the next few weeks in a courtship that was the talk of Silver Ridge. Nathaniel came to town regularly, staying at the boarding house but spending most of his time with Sarah. They took walks, had meals together, and talked endlessly about their hopes and dreams. Nathaniel began spending less time at his mountain cabin and more time in town. He took on work as a guide for hunting parties, which paid well and allowed him to stay closer. He even helped Sarah with some repairs to the store, fixing a leaking roof and reinforcing the back door so no one could break in again. As the weeks turned into months, it became clear to everyone, including Sarah and Nathaniel themselves, that this was not just a passing fancy. This was real, deep, and lasting love. One evening in late November, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Nathaniel asked Sarah to take a walk with him. She bundled up in her warmest cloak, and they walked to their spot by the creek, now partially frozen over. "Sarah," Nathaniel began, and there was a nervousness in his voice she had never heard before. "I have something to ask you." He dropped to one knee in the snow, and Sarah's heart stopped. "I know I am not a conventional man," Nathaniel said. "I do not have much in the way of money or possessions, but I have love, so much love for you that it feels like my chest might burst with it. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "Sarah Whitmore, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Sarah's face, freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Nathaniel surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at once. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. "Where did you get this?" Sarah asked, admiring the simple beauty of the band. "I made it," Nathaniel admitted. "I have been working on it for weeks, in secret. I found gold in the mountains last summer, just a small amount. I took it to a jeweler in the next town over and had him teach me how to shape it. I wanted it to be from me, made with my own hands." Sarah looked at the ring with new eyes, understanding the love and effort that had gone into it. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she whispered. They were married in early December, in a small ceremony at the town's church. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, and carried a bouquet of pine boughs since no flowers bloomed in winter. Nathaniel wore his best clothes and looked nervous and proud and impossibly handsome. Mrs. Henderson cried through the whole ceremony. Sheriff Bradley gave Sarah away, standing in for her late father. And when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Nathaniel kissed her, the small congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held at the boarding house, with half the town turning out to celebrate. Even the miners from the camps brought gifts, and the saloon keeper donated barrels of cider and beer. It was a joyous occasion, full of music and laughter and good wishes. As the evening wore on, Sarah and Nathaniel slipped away to her quarters above the store, their quarters now. Nathaniel carried her over the threshold, and Sarah laughed with pure happiness. "Hello, husband," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Hello, wife," Nathaniel replied, his eyes dark with love and desire. Their wedding night was everything Sarah had hoped and more. Nathaniel was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and loved. They learned each other in the soft lamplight, mapping new territory with careful hands and whispered endearments. And when they finally came together, it felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Sarah's head on Nathaniel's broad chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I love you," she murmured, pressing a kiss over his heart. "I love you too," Nathaniel replied, his voice rumbling in his chest. "Me, more than I ever thought possible." Life, as a married couple, quickly settled into a comfortable rhythm. Nathaniel continued to work as a guide and occasional prospector, but he also became an integral part of running the store. His presence deterred troublemakers, and his knowledge of the wilderness made him invaluable in helping customers select proper equipment for hunting and trapping. They kept the apartment above the store, but also began planning for a larger home. Nathaniel wanted to build them a house on the outskirts of town, something bigger with land for a garden and maybe some livestock. "I want to give you everything," he said one night as they discussed plans. "A real home, security, a good life." "You have already given me everything," Sarah said, cupping his bearded cheek. "You gave me love. Everything else is just details." Winter passed into spring, and with the warming weather came news that made Sarah's heart leap with joy and fear. She was pregnant. Nathaniel was beside himself with excitement. He became even more protective than before, insisting Sarah rest more and not lift heavy items in the store. Sarah tolerated his fussing because she knew it came from love, though she sometimes had to remind him that pregnancy was not an illness. "I'm still perfectly capable of working," she said when he tried to take a box from her hands for the third time that day. "I know," Nathaniel said, "but humor me. I just want to take care of you." "You are taking care of me," Sarah assured him, "every single day." As Sarah's belly grew, so did their house. Nathaniel worked on it every spare moment, did enlisting help from men in town who owed him favors or simply wanted to help. By midsummer, the house was finished, a beautiful 2-story home with a wraparound porch and enough room for a growing family. They moved in during August, just in time. Sarah's baby was due in September, and she was grateful to be settled before the birth. The house was perfect, filled with furniture Nathaniel had built and curtains Sarah had sewn. They had a real kitchen, a spacious bedroom, and even a nursery waiting for the new arrival. On a warm evening in early September, Sarah went into labor. Nathaniel sent for the midwife and then paced the house like a caged mountain lion, worried and unable to sit still. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah was not sure she could continue. But Nathaniel stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. "You are the strongest person I know," he told her as another contraction racked her body. "You can do this. I am right here with you." Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. The midwife placed the baby in Sarah's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant with wonder. "A boy," she whispered. Nathaniel leaned over her shoulder, his eyes shining with tears. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You are perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel, after Sarah's father. He was a healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray-blue eyes. Nathaniel was a devoted father from the first moment, cradling his son with surprising gentleness for such a large man. The first year of Daniel's life was a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Sarah continued to run the store with help from a young woman she hired, while Nathaniel balanced his work with caring for their son. They made an excellent team, supporting each other through the challenges of new parenthood. As Daniel grew, he showed signs of having both his parents' best qualities. He was curious and brave like his mother, but he also had his father's quiet strength and ability to observe the world around him. Nathaniel taught him about the mountains, taking him on gentle walks through the pine forests as soon as he could walk. Sarah taught him his letters and numbers, determined that he would have the education she and Nathaniel had cobbled together on their own. When Daniel was 3 years old, Sarah found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Rose, and she was the image of Sarah with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Their family was complete. Nathaniel had expanded the house again, adding more bedrooms, and they were finally living the life they had dreamed about during those early conversations by the creek. The store continued to thrive under Sarah's management. She had become a respected businesswoman in Silver Ridge, and even those who had once doubted her abilities now sought her advice. Nathaniel's reputation as a guide and tracker grew, and he was often hired by wealthy parties from back east who wanted authentic Western experiences. But no matter how busy they were, they always made time for each other and for their children. Evening meals were sacred family time, with Daniel and Rose chattering about their days while Sarah and Nathaniel exchanged quiet, loving glances across the table. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathaniel took Sarah back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed. The children were with Mrs. Henderson for the evening, giving them a rare moment alone. "Do you remember what I said that day?" Nathaniel asked, holding her close. "That I could not imagine my life without you?" "I remember," Sarah said, leaning into him. "It is still true," Nathaniel said. "Even more now than then. You have given me a family, a home, a purpose. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "You have given me the same," Sarah replied. She reached up to touch his face, with the beard now threaded with silver, though he was only 33. "You defended my honor when no one else would. You stood up for me, fought for me, loved me. How could I not spend the rest of my life loving you back?" They kissed as the creek bubbled beside them, the same sound it had made all those years ago when they had first fallen in love. Some things, Sarah thought, were eternal. The years continued to pass in a blur of joy and hard work. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who loved both the business world his mother inhabited and the wilderness his father knew so well. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Nathaniel and Sarah grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. There were challenges, be it, of course, economic downturns that threatened the store, harsh winters that made survival difficult, illnesses that scared them. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other. When Sarah turned 40, Nathaniel threw her a surprise party that brought tears to her eyes. The whole town turned out, including people who had once looked down on her for being an independent woman. She had proven herself 100 times over, and she was now one of the most respected citizens of Silver Ridge. "Speech," someone called, and the crowd took up the chant. Sarah stood, flustered but smiling. "I do not know what to say," she began. "When I first came to Silver Ridge, I was just a girl with a father who believed in me. When he died, I thought I might lose everything. But I did not, because I found people who supported me. I found a community, and most of all, her eyes found Nathaniel in the crowd. I found love, the kind of love that defends you, protects you, and lifts you up, the kind of love that makes everything possible." The crowd applauded, but Sarah only had eyes for her husband, who was smiling at her with the same adoration he had shown since that first day he defended her honor. As the years went by, they watched Daniel court and marry a sweet girl from a neighboring town. They became grandparents to twin boys who were as wild and energetic as their grandfather. Rose grew up to become a teacher, using her intelligence and compassion to educate the next generation of Silver Ridge children. Nathaniel eventually retired from guiding, content to spend his days helping Sarah run the store and playing with his grandchildren. His hair went completely silver, and his body bore the marks of a life lived hard in the mountains. But to Sarah, he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. On a warm evening in late summer, when they were both in their 60s, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter ringing out in the golden light. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, her hand in Nathaniel's. "When you fought Dutch that day, did you ever think we would end up here?" "I hoped," Nathaniel said. "From the moment I saw you, I hoped, but I never dared to believe I could be this fortunate." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for bandaging my knuckles that day, and for kissing them. That was when I knew." "Knew what?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "That you were the one, that you saw me, really saw me, and cared about me. Not just because I defended you, but because of who I was." He turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes still as piercing as ever. "You have been the great adventure of my life, Sarah Cross." "And you have been mine," Sarah replied, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. "I love you, Nathaniel. I have loved you from the moment you stood up for me, and I will love you until my last breath." And beyond. Nathaniel said. "Beyond that and into whatever comes next." They sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching their legacy play out before them in the form of laughing grandchildren and a thriving town. Sarah thought back to that terrifying day when Dutch had spread his lies and how Nathaniel had stepped in like an avenging angel. She thought about bandaging his wounded hands, about the tenderness that had overcome her as she kissed each knuckle. That single act of compassion had changed everything. It had opened her heart to love, had shown Nathaniel that she saw him as more than just a protector or defender. It had been the beginning of a story that was still being written, even now, decades later. As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Sarah leaned her head on Nathaniel's broad shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat that way until the stars came out, two souls joined by love and tested by time, still as devoted to each other as they had been on that fateful day in 1878. Their love had built a family, a home, and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And it had all started with a mountain man who was willing to fight for a lady's honor, and a lady who had seen the worth of the man behind the violence, who had tenderly bandaged his wounds and kissed his knuckles in a gesture that spoke of love, gratitude, and the promise of a future together. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the fights won or the obstacles overcome, but the quiet moments of tenderness, the daily choices to love and be loved, the steady building of a life worth living. Sarah and Nathaniel had found that life together, and they had lived it fully, with joy and passion and unwavering commitment. As they finally rose from the porch and went inside to tuck their grandchildren into bed, Sarah took one last look at the mountains that had brought Nathaniel to her. They stood eternal and unchanging, a reminder that some things, like true love, endured through all the seasons of life. And she knew, deep in her heart, that their love story would be told for generations to come, a testament to the power of honor, courage, and the healing touch of a woman who saw a wounded warrior and chose to love him. The end.